My name is Sandra McLeish, and I'm one of the JMEA board directors. It gives me great pleasure this morning to be your facilitator for this webinar. It's actually a workshop on the elimination of trans fats from foods. Thank you again for being with us. We're going to have such a robust discussion after we finish our amazing presentations. And it really is very timely for us to be here together like this. So I'm encouraging you, as the JMEA fully endorses this critical subject, we are happy to have both local and international partners on board. Please note the webinar is being recorded, and we will proceed as per our agenda, which is to have our Vice President, Dr. André Gordon, give the welcome and opening remarks. And he will then be followed by Mr. Julien LaFleur, who is the Deputy Secretary General from the International Food and Beverage Alliance. That's the IFBA, and we'll be hearing a lot more about the alliance in the next coming months. And then we will have our remarks. Our keynote speaker actually is Dr. the Honourable Christopher Tufton, and we really want to welcome you, Minister, for taking the time to be with us this morning. We want to also thank Mr. LaFleur for getting other members of the IFBA, namely Cargill and PepsiCo, involved in this workshop this morning. We will be followed by presentations from our three presenters, and I will tell you more about each presenter as we reach there right before they begin. But for housekeeping matters, we have already have all our mics muted throughout the webinar, and if you have any questions as the presentation goes through, we are asking you please to just put your questions into the chat. We will record them and we will answer them at that appropriate time in our agenda. So without further ado, I would like to also introduce immediately Dr. André Gordon. He's one of our vice presidents of the Jamaica Manufacturers and Exporters Association. And I honestly feel that Dr. Gordon needs no real introduction, but please allow me to give you a brief update on who this amazing gentleman is. He's Chair and Chief Executive Officer of Technological Solutions Limited, TSL, which is a company which provides technical services to the manufacturing, distribution, food service, hospitality, and export sectors in our country. And he's the Chief Executive Officer and Principal Consultant of TSL. Dr. Gordon has over 35 years experience in providing solution-oriented technical assistance to various players in the food industry, including private sector and support institutions in Jamaica, the Caribbean, Canada, Western and Southern Africa, the United States, United Kingdom, and Europe. Dr. Gordon has led the development of over 85 commercially successful new products and provided technical services support to well over 1,000 companies in various sectors. We want to say a special thank you to Dr. Gordon being with us this morning. And I'll just hand over to you, André, for your opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Chair and Chief Facilitator and Director of the JMEA, Sandra McLeish. Dr. the Honourable Christopher Tufton, fellow directors of the JMEA, or presenters, Professor Alafia Samuels, Dr. Paul Smith, Mr. Rick Della Porta, JMEA members, senior representatives from the Ministry of Health and Wellness, attendees all, good morning. It is my honor to welcome you to this important webinar on the elimination of trans fats from foods. As you shall hear from the experts, trans fats have typically been chemically modified to help to improve the shelf life, texture, flavor, and other characteristics of foods. They are found in many processed foods, including baked goods, fried foods, snacks, breakfast cereals, dessert, margarine, amongst others. Both those produced locally and, of course, those imported into Jamaica. Unfortunately, it has been discovered that they can also be deleterious to our health, increasing the risk of heart disease, stroke, and type 2 diabetes, amongst others. The impact of trans fat on public health is therefore a major concern in Jamaica and the CARICOM region, as we continue to face the growing burden of chronic non-communicable diseases, NCDs. Heart disease in particular is one of the leading causes of death in CARICOM, and the consumption of trans fat is a significant risk factor for this disease. However, it's not just a matter of public health, but also a matter of social equity and social justice, because trans fats are most often found in low-cost, highly processed foods that are disproportionately consumed by low-income communities. These communities already face a higher burden of chronic NCDs, and the elimination of trans fat from their diets could have a significant positive impact on their health outcomes. In June 2022, at a scientific forum under the theme Preventing NCDs in Jamaica, focus on industrially produced trans fats, the JMEA was informed by Professor Fitzroy Henry, then from the University of Technology, that a Ministry of Health and Wellness commissioned trans fat study of 308 food samples taken from the local market found that 104 or 33.8% of these had industrially produced trans fat. The study also found that industrially produced trans fat, IPTFAs, were present in 57.8%, or 104 out of 180 products whose labels indicated that they had zero trans fats. This is a situation that we at the JMEA, as well as other stakeholders, are very concerned about and which must be addressed. Consequently, in keeping with the declaration emanating from the 6th Joint Council for Trade and Economic Development, / Council for Human and Social Development, that is COTED/COSAD meeting, which was held on April 29th, the JMEA has formally recognized that industrially produced trans fatty acid, IPTFAs, have been classified as harmful to health and we at the JMEA have made removing IPTFAs by eliminating the partially hydrogenated oils from the local food supply a major priority for the organization. The process of eliminating trans fats from our food supply will not be easy, and it will require a collaborative effort between the government, food manufacturers, and the public. We need to work together to eliminate trans fats from all foods consumed in Jamaica. This includes foods served in restaurants, fast food outlets, and schools. The Ministry of Health and Wellness has already invited the JMEA to be part of a joint working group, along with the Ministry of Industry, Investments and Commerce and the National Compliance and Regulatory Authority, to focus on addressing this issue. Our Minister of Health and Wellness, who is our keynote speaker, has been an advocate for ensuring we try to get this done as soon as is possible, a position, of course, with which we agree. Manufacturers with trans fats in their products will therefore need to reformulate to remove the trans fats and find alternate ingredients that maintain the texture and flavor as well as other characteristics of their products. We know this will not be easy and it will take time. We know it will require significant investment in research and development, investments that we at the JMEA, however, feel are well worth it to protect and improve the health of the Jamaican people as a matter of priority. This workshop is another important step in that direction, as well as the partnerships that we have forged, which you've heard about, and which will help us along in this process. In concluding, the JMEA supports the elimination of trans fats from our food supply as a critical step towards promoting improved public health and reducing the burden of chronic NCDs in Jamaica. We at the JMEA urge you all to join us on this important journey and help us create a healthier future for all Jamaicans. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gordon. Thank you for underscoring that the JMEA is indeed in partnership with the Ministry of Health and Wellness on this. This is a joint mandate that we both share, and it is something that we are encouraging our members to take very seriously as we work with you on this elimination of IPTFAs in our foods. I'd like to now hand over to Mr. Julien LaFleur. Julien is the Deputy Secretary of the International Food and Beverage Alliance, IFBA, and it's a title he's had since 2014. In this capacity, he supports stakeholder engagement of the Alliance with global decision makers, such as the World Health Organization in Geneva and the Food and Agriculture Organization in Rome. He has over 15 years of experience as a consultant for landmark public affairs, advising and representing clients in a wide range of sectors, including health, food and beverage, consumer goods, and technology. Julien holds a law degree from the University of Paris, and his European law degree he has with the University of London. He's a French national and is fluent in English and Spanish. And we thank you so much for being with us and for your ongoing partnership with us, Julien. Over to you for your opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Sandra. I'm very pleased to be a part of this project. I'm very heartened to hear Dr. Gordon's opening remarks, which I thought were very inspiring and were the spirit with which our group wanted to work on trans fat. And I'm pleased to see an organization like JMEA at the domestic level working exactly in the spirit in which this undertaking was imagined. I had a presentation, but I'm just going to speak because I realize we're getting short on time. So I'm indeed I'm speaking today on behalf of the International Food and Beverage Alliance. It's an alliance at the global level of some of the world's biggest food and beverage manufacturers, including PepsiCo, who has kindly agreed to share their experience today. We represent these companies on global issues around nutrition, health, sustainable food systems. And in that capacity, we've been discussing with the World Health Organization a variety of issues that have to do with health, nutrition on one end, and how the food and beverage manufacturers have a role to play, including on sodium reduction, on portion control, on labeling to provide consumers with nutrition information to make healthy and sustainable diet-related choices. And in this context, the WHO invited us in 2018 as the leading organization representing the food and beverage manufacturers. They invited us to revisit the existing commitment that the Alliance had on trans fat, to align them with their more ambitious commitment and threshold on trans fat. And we'll get into the details with our various speakers today. So we had an ongoing dialogue with the WHO. We were able to align the manufacturers to their expected threshold and commitment for trans fat. I'm pleased to report that we'll be in line with the objective and compliant 100% across the board by the end of 2023. Meanwhile, there's still a lot of trans fat in the supply chain, including at the local level, where a lot of the intake of food and nutrition in general isn't necessarily represented by the IFBA members and is a reflection of the variety of the local food marketplace. So it's very important that this commitment has a translation, has a local embodiment, that JMEA was very courageous to take the lead on, and I'm taking this opportunity to thank Joy for her relentless drive in this project, as well as, of course, the critical leadership of the Minister of Health, the Honourable Minister Tufton. We have put together a guide that we will share the link of shortly, that explains how to transition away from trans fats and onto healthier produce. It takes you step by step over the initial phase of understanding where the trans fat is in your food production supply and how to replace it. It's a good introduction to this necessary revolution. And I'm pleased also to have speakers from Cargill, a trusted and important partner in this endeavor, as well as Rick Della Porta from PepsiCo, who will explain in greater detail how to phase out industrial trans fat. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Julien, for that. And it's really admirable, the alliance that you have been successfully a part of at the global level, and especially for the achievement you will see at the end of 2023. I just want to point out to everyone that this International Food and Beverage Alliance is very significant to the JMEA, especially as we look towards this critical area of eliminating trans fat from our diets, from our foods, from our manufacturing spaces. And so I just want to let everyone know that we have actually published in the chat the document you mentioned, which is the guide to explain this transition. And we thank you in advance for journeying with us on this. Wonderful, and thank you for being here. So it's my pleasure now to hand over to our keynote speaker. Dr. the Honourable Christopher Tufton, Member of Parliament for West Central St. Andrews since March 2016, is Jamaica's Minister of Health and Wellness. Prior to this, he was the Minister of Industry, Investment and Commerce, and the Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries. Dr. Tufton is a business strategist with expertise including international business and marketing strategy, specializing in foreign direct investments and foreign direct facilitation in the impact of public policy on industry. He's a graduate of the University of the West Indies, Georgia State University, where he received the Management Studies and Marketing degrees, and he completed his doctorate in business administration at the Manchester Business School in the United Kingdom in 2002. Thank you so much for being with us, Minister. I just want to mention that whenever I travel across the Caribbean, as I frequently do, I'm always proud to say that I am a part of Jamaica and affiliated with the Ministry of Health and Wellness, because you are so highly respected across the Caribbean. It is my pleasure to welcome you, sir, to bring our keynote address.
Thank you very much, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much, Madam Chair, for your kind words. I appreciate them. So I want to just recognize all who are online, and there are quite a few names, but in particular, of course, Dr. Gordon, Vice President of the JMEA, our moderator, Ms. Sandra McLeish, Julien LaFleur, Deputy Secretary General, International Food and Beverage Alliance, Professor Samuels, Consultant, NCD Prevention and Control, Jamaica, Dr. Paul Smith, and Mr. Rick Della Porta, who is Senior Principal Scientist, Fats and Oils, Technical Team PepsiCo, Frito-Lay for the North American region. Others, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. So I won't be long. I don't classify this as a guest speaker delivery. I see this as a conversation. Unfortunately, I can't spend all day with you, but my team members are online and they will track and participate in the discussion. A lot has been said around the issues around trans fats, and I won't repeat them. Jamaica is particularly vulnerable, as is the rest of the world, because of the negative impact of consumption of trans fatty acids on our mortality rate, with NCDs, of course, being the leading cause of death, non-communicable diseases, some 70% of deaths annually, and we lose about 18 to 20,000 Jamaicans each year, so 70% or so of that. The efforts at elimination, I think, has gone well around collaboration, and I want to use the opportunity to commend the JMEA and other stakeholder groups, the university community, the multilateral partners in the WHO, PAHO, and others who have played a very important role in making this possible and taking us to this stage. You know, the research that we did, which was referenced by Dr. Gordon, is quite telling. It lays the foundation. It's a kind of a baseline study, if you will, on what's in our foods. And we did this because we felt it was important to provide information in the first instance to the population, to the stakeholder groups. So whatever decision we make going forward, it is based on information. It is informed by research, scientific research. And what is very clear is that we do have trans fats in our foods, quite a bit of it. Secondly, it is a major cause of cardiovascular disease. It is a major contributor to lifestyle illnesses and mortality. Those are not disputable. And the third, of course, which I am welcoming, is that we have all agreed to work together towards its elimination. And that augurs well for the future, for ourselves, but for future generations. Just to say too that we are not alone in this regard. So if we were thinking that somehow we are isolated on this course, just want to encourage us that since the World Health Organization first called for global elimination of industrially produced trans fats in 2018, with an elimination target set for 2023, population coverage of best practice policies has increased almost sixfold. So the world is listening, and we should feel proud to be a part of that very progressive movement, if you will. 43 countries have now implemented best practice policies for tackling trans fats in food, with 2.8 billion people protected globally. Unfortunately, none in CARICOM as yet, which is why I think we have a duty and should feel proud also here in Jamaica to be leading that charge. But we're not alone globally. There are many others in doing it. In the region of the Americas, Canada and the US implemented nationwide bans on partially hydrogenated oils, the main source of industrially produced trans fats. Canada and the US both require trans fat to be labeled on packaged foods. So again, from a trade perspective, our primary trading partners are a big part of this movement, this very progressive movement, and that should make it easier on us in terms of, you know, our import requirements once these new rules are in place, because these are major suppliers, whether of raw material or finished goods. And similarly so, as exporters, we would have aligned ourselves with standards that are accepted, certainly among the major trading partners. So we are really synchronizing, separate and apart from the health benefits. We're creating trade arrangements that are synchronized and therefore should be not conflicting in any way and not be excessive, you know, whether it's through cost or bureaucracy, to implement what is being proposed. And other important fact tips: Argentina, Chile, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and Uruguay have already set limits for industrially produced trans fats in fats oils for 2%. In Chile, this also applies to all foods. The others have 5% limits applying to all foods. Bolivia is currently preparing regulations, and Brazil and Paraguay are advanced in their processes. While most trans fat elimination policies to date have been implemented in higher income countries, mainly in the Americas and in Europe, an increased number of middle income countries are implementing or adopting these policies, including countries like Bangladesh, India, Philippines, and the Ukraine. Best practice policies also being considered in Mexico, Nigeria, Sri Lanka in 2023. According to the World Health Organization, Nigeria would be the second and most populous country in Africa to put a best practice trans fat elimination policy in place. And again, this is a good example of where the world is headed. In terms of the best practices, I think it's worth noting, I'm sure this body would be aware, but nevertheless, mandatory national limits of 2 grams of industrially produced trans fats per 100 grams of total fats in all foods, and mandatory national ban on the production of use of partially hydrogenated oils as an ingredient in all foods. So, you know, I reference the global benchmark because this is, the time has come, and there's a overwhelming acceptance that this is the direction we need to move in. As the largest country in the English-speaking Caribbean, Jamaica has always set a trend for some of these best practices in all areas. And so I think it is appropriate that we are moving in this direction, that we're meeting, that we're discussing, and that, you know, it is also good that we have the key players of industry who are part of the process. So I look forward to a good discussion today. I look forward to some decisive actions and certainly better understanding of what needs to be done. And of course, from our standpoint as Ministry of Health and Wellness and the government, we will continue to press ahead, working with our partners to achieve the timelines that we would have established. A big part of going forward, in conclusion, of course, is to educate the population. And so a key part of the discussion has to be how we get Jamaicans, by extension the region and otherwise, to see this as an important lifestyle change that will benefit them in the short, medium, and longer term. And so that communications program is going to also be important, separate and apart from some of the technical work that will be necessary in moving the process forward. So thanks again. Congrats to the team for doing the work, getting us to this point. And we look forward to the continuation of what will be, I think, a very important initiative. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Minister. Thank you for being with us and for the words of encouragement and guidance that 43 countries have already taken this on in terms of setting their limits and on the reduction of trans fats in their manufacturing sector and in their foods. And we recognize that none of the CARICOM members have yet taken this on, but we dare say that Jamaica will definitely be the first. And the JMEA remains committed on this journey with the Ministry of Health and Wellness. I want to say thank you as well for reminding us that we continually need to align ourselves with these standards in trades, which we have been doing. And our primary trading partners have already taken this on, as you pointed out. And this is a great incentive for us as manufacturers and exporters to continue on this journey. So thank you for being with us, sir, and for your ongoing guidance. I just want to welcome persons who've just joined us. We are going to be going into even deeper in the technical aspects of our webinar this morning. We're going to be hearing first from Professor T. Alafia Samuels, and then we're going to be hearing from Dr. Paul Smith, and then Mr. Rick Della Porta. And allow me please to just read a short bio on each of them as we transition. I would also like again to encourage persons, as you have questions, as we go through the presentations, please put your questions in the chat. We will definitely get to them. We have reserved time, as it is a workshop, a webinar, that we are going to be going into your questions and ensure that we continue on this journey as we look towards eliminating trans fats in our food. So special welcome to Professor T. Alafia Samuels, who's going to be sharing with us shortly. Professor Samuels is a former director of the George Allain Chronic Disease Research Center at the University of the West Indies, Barbados, and is now with the Caribbean Institute for Health Research at UAE in Jamaica. She's a medical doctor trained at University of the West Indies, Bona campus. She holds a master's in public health and a PhD in chronic disease epidemiology from the Johns Hopkins University. And I shall say both of those were with honors. Her career has included both working with the Ministry of Health and Wellness, delivering and managing public sector health programs for over 20 years. And especially with the University of the West Indies for the last 10 years. Professor Samuels, thank you so much for all the work you've been doing in this area. Your research interests have included policy, practice and evaluation of NCD's prevention and control programs, and translating evidence into practice. And we really look forward to your presentation showing us how you can take us on this journey as we look towards this important milestone for the country. Over to you, Professor Samuels.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you for having me on the webinar this morning. All protocol being established, Minister Tufton, good morning. Good morning to everybody else. I'd like to just share with you the science behind what it is we're trying to do here. So we're going to talk about, fats and trans fats, and then in the Jamaican food and the global and regional approach. Of course, there's going to be a little bit of overlap with, other speakers, but we will work it out. So fat is important. The human brain is 60% fat. We get a lot of vitamins through fat. It promotes normal cell growth. It's a good reserve for energy, and it acts like a cushion for some of our vital organs. The problem is that we are consuming too much fat. So the red line that goes across this graph is the goal of our fat consumption. We're talking about how much fat we consume. And the red line going across is the goal. And you can see that ever since we have been consuming in fat in excess of what the goal is. And this is both local and imported fats. And there are various types of fats. There are saturated fats and unsaturated fats. The saturated fats are usually found like in animal protein, and they come in a variety, short, medium, and long chain fats. The unsaturated fats are interesting because they have multiple categories, some of which are healthy and some of which are not. So you need to know your fats. So in terms of trans fats, there are industrially produced artificial trans fats, and then there are a small amount of natural trans fats. So, so we not only eat too much fat, but we eat the wrong kind of fat, and that can increase your risk for illness. So this is a chart that is just showing death rates, the increase in death rates with consumption of various types of fat. So as I mentioned before, the unsaturated fats, the polyunsaturated fats that you find like in salmon and nuts and so on, are actually good for you and make you live longer. And this is the whole Mediterranean diet thing, right? So also the monounsaturated fats, ackee, which is not on this graph, but it is one of them, avocado, pear, and so on. Now, increasing your mortality are saturated fats, such as red meats, butter and cheese, but the most dangerous of them all is the trans fat, and you can see that it increases your mortality by 20%, which is quite significant. How does it do that? It's because trans fats increases the buildup of fats, cholesterols in the artery walls, which cause narrowing of the arteries. And if the narrowing of the artery happens in the brain, you get a stroke. If it happens in the heart, you get a heart attack. And as been mentioned before, stroke, diabetes, and people from diabetes usually die from either stroke or heart attacks. So stroke, diabetes, and ischemic heart disease are the leading causes of death in Jamaica. And the change between 2007 and 2017 is very impressive. We have increased by about 35% in all of those diseases. So we are on the wrong trajectory, And this is why this intervention is so important, because it can help to bring us a little bit down. So how do trans fats actually work in the body? They increase the bad cholesterol, the LDL. It lowers the good cholesterol, the HDL. It affects platelet function. So platelets are needed for clotting. And so because it affects their function, it causes these little clots to form in the brain and in the heart and give you the heart attack and the stroke. And the consumption of trans fat causes 34% increase in all-cause mortality, so death from any reason. And it causes a 28% increase in heart attack mortality. And these effects are dose-related. So if you eat a lot of processed foods with the trans fats, you're going to have higher increase in your mortality. The use of trans fat also diminishes mental performance and increases the risk of depression, cognitive decline with age, and Alzheimer's disease. So what are the source of trans fats? Trans fats originate from 3 areas. There are naturally occurring trans fatty acids, which are produced by ruminant animals and comprise about 3 to 6% of total fat in meat and milk products. That is not a target of what we are doing, except to say, of course, you should eat less meat. But anyhow, that's another topic. Then number 3, industrially produced trans fats are produced during industrial refinement of vegetable oils and when oils and fats are heated and reheated. But the most important area I have outlined in blue. Industrially produced trans fats are man-made. They are produced by an industrial process that adds hydrogen to unsaturated oils, resulting in partially hydrogenated oils. And you will hear more about this in the next presentations. When these partially hydrogenated oils are used directly, like in cooking oils, shortening margarine, and so on, and also in the commercial production of biscuits, cakes, and snacks, this is when you get your trans fatty acids in the food supply. So we know that partially hydrogenated oils are the most abundant source of industrially produced trans fats in foods. And so there's going to be quite a focus on these partially hydrogenated oils. The Caribbean has the highest rate of premature mortality, and we know that these trans fats cause death. They are banned in almost all high-income countries, as the minister said, but low and middle-income countries often lack the capacity to test, and small island developing states, particularly in the Pacific and the Caribbean, import 60 to 80% on average, and some as high as 90% of their foods. And so partially hydrogenated oils are imported and lead to forming of trans fats. There is no hydrogenation taking place in the Caribbean as far as we know. So all of our PHOs are imported. So that's another area for us to focus on. So in Jamaican foods, as like elsewhere in the world, a lot of ultra-processed foods, and trans fats are quite rampant in the Jamaican situation. Trade is open. Manufacturers may not know or be aware that their raw materials contain PHOs. And these are the foods, the shortenings and so on. And we really need to protect consumers from this. So, as I mentioned, we import our partially hydrogenated oils. So where do our oils in Jamaica come from? Main source is the United States. They have banned trans fats, so we can be pretty sure that those oils do not have partially hydrogenated oils. The second most important is Indonesia, and we are not clear as to the partial hydrogenation of the oils coming from Indonesia. And of course, if people are re-exporting, like maybe Barbados and Suriname, also it depends on where their oils are coming from. So we are importing the problem, and we need to stop that. In terms of the global situation, this was mentioned before. As you can see, most high-income countries have already instituted best practices. There's none in CARICOM. It's also interesting to look at these best practices by income level of countries. So high income countries, almost 80% have done it. Low and middle income countries, almost 50%. But upper middle income, which is where most of the Caribbean sits, have not done this yet. And low income countries, very few, if any. So WHO has the target of elimination by 2023. It's a simple policy measure. The action is compelling, and just to note that it's time sensitive, because countries that are slow to regulate may see their TFA burden rise as manufacturers selling products that contain TFA search for markets that still allow foods containing TFAs. So time is of the essence. The World Health Organization has promoted the replace as the mechanism to use to review, promote, legislate, assess, create, and enforce. I won't go into the details, but it is here for you. At the CARICOM regional policy level, there have been there have been two really meetings of COSOD and COTED that have occurred. That is at the CARICOM level, meetings of ministers of health jointly with ministers of trade. And the first meeting looked at setting up the process of examining the quality of foods that are imported. This was coming from the mandate from the CARICOM heads of government meetings. And then by the second meeting, the background work had been done. The countries had met, we had discussions and so on. And so in April of 2022, CARICOM adopted the following. They agreed to work towards the prohibition, production, importation, distribution, and sale and use of partial hydrogenated oils. They committed to develop a policy position to work towards regulation and legislation, which should be in place by December 2023 and no later than December 2024. And it mandated the Intergovernmental Working Group on Unhealthy Diets and Obesogenic Environments, which was the mechanism that the Ministers of Health and Trade set up within the region. This group got support from WHO, PAHO, and other collaborating partners and countries. And the decision was to eliminate partially hydrogenated oils by 2025. I would just like to remind us that subsequent on the Myrie court case, actually decisions taken at CARICOM are legally binding on countries. So we need to keep that in mind. It's not a suggestion, it is a mandate, I guess. So in terms of what has been happening in Jamaica, in 2018, under a project funded by the International Development Research Center in Canada and led by the University of the West Indies, the labs were upgraded, and I'll show you another slide on that, and we had independent testing. In 2021, Minister of Health Tufton reported in Parliament the results of those tests, and in fact, it has been mentioned previously. And then we have been engaged with JMEA and the Ministry of Health in several meetings. And this is just one in the series, and no doubt this series is going to continue. So this is just a photograph of the signing of the documents when the project upgraded the ability of the country to analyze sugar, salts, trans fats, and saturated fats. So for the first time, Jamaica had this capacity to measure. And we did this through upgrading labs, Jamaica, the Bureau of Standards, and the Scientific Research Council. This was launched in 2019. And at the time, Minister Tufton said, this historic, significant initiative will assist the government in its drive to reduce the high prevalence of NCDs. So the results that you heard about earlier, very briefly, we followed the WHO sampling plan, which is outlined there. We use gas chromatography and flame ionization and the American Oil Chemist Society methods, and I think they are on the call as well, or their representatives. And we found industrially produced trans fats, as was reported earlier, in a third of the samples. However, confectionery, 90% of them had trans fats, condiments, oils, and so on. You can see the list going down. So trans fats are not randomly distributed. They are very concentrated in certain types of foods. So you may want to reduce your consumption of these foods until we get our trans fat ban. The trans fats labels, as was mentioned before, one of the most disturbing things was that the majority of products that had trans fats, their label said trans fat free. And this is what happens when you can't, when people know that you don't have capacity to measure yourself. You know, we can write anything on the label, so if you can't verify it, then, you know. So that is a real issue. And I also at the bottom have just listed the USA and Canada references and how many of our products did not meet that standard. And just to say, yes, that Minister Tufton has been a very important leader in this regard. And the intervention, the work that we're doing with JMEA is going to continue. This is just the start. I was very heartened to hear Dr. Julien LaFleur of IFBA mention in his opening remarks the importance of sodium and labeling. So this is work that we have to do together in the future, but one step at a time. We're starting with trans fats, but we have more work to do after that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor, for that presentation. Your presentation was on the importance of eliminating industrially produced trans fatty acids from Jamaica's food supply, but you gave us a lot to think about, especially underscoring what was shared earlier, that 96% of some of our labels in Jamaica are really labeled incorrectly, some of our products. We're very fortunate to have the person who speaks to the ministers of health regularly for CARICOM being a part of our webinar this morning. And I want to say a special thank you for reminding us that the use of trans fats in our diet has increased mortality, am I correct, by 20%. Yes. That's significant. That is significant. Thank you so much for being with us and for staying with us as we go into our Q&A in a short while. So it's my pleasure to move to the next presenter, who is Dr. Paul Smith. He's going to be speaking on trans fat removal from foods. And Dr. Smith has a BA in Material Science from the University of Oxford and a PhD in Food Science from the University of Leeds. He has over 30 years experience in the food industry, working on lipid chemistry and the structuring of foods. He has worked for Unilever in the UK and the Institute for Surface Chemistry in Sweden, as well as being a guest professor at Hiroshima University in Japan. He currently is the core researcher and is part of the core research and development team for Cargill, which is based in Belgium, where he is this morning. He's 7 hours ahead. So it's afternoon for you. So thank you so much, sir, for being with us. And he has over 30 publications and several patents, and is a regular speaker at international conferences. Sir, thank you so much for speaking with us this morning in Jamaica on the trans fat removal from foods. Over to you, Paul.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that lovely introduction. And yeah, I'd like to thank the organisers for giving me this opportunity to discuss with you this morning. And yeah, hello and good morning to everyone. What I'd like to do to follow up the introduction we've just had to to trans fats in food and the effects of partially hydrogenated fats is to look from the perspective of an oil supplier to see different ways in which we can reduce remove the trans fats from foods, and to suggest different tactics and different ways in which we can do it for for different food products. So we need to think about why we'd want to use trans fats in a particular product, and then come back to look and see the different alternatives that there can be. But first of all, perhaps we can start with a bit of background looking at trans fats. And we can see that they've been used over the past few decades, and even looking back quite recently. So in the 1990s, we can see scientific articles and technical articles claiming that partially hydrogenated fat, hardened fat, is more healthful than butter. Of course, that is something which, as we saw from the previous speaker, which we would very much disagree with today. And even if we look at Bailey's Industrial Oils and Fats, which is the encyclopedia, if you like, for oils and fats, so a well-renowned textbook. If we look back to the 2005 edition, the author suggests that there'll always be a need for hydrogenated fats because they work so well and they're so cheap. So we can see that's why they've been used, why they're so popular, because they're functional, they work very well, and they're cheap. But well, clearly they're not good for health. So we need to find different ways to build this kind of structure and the functionalities that the hydrogenated fats have given us. And what are these? I mean, why would you use a trans fat? Well, the good thing, the things that they work about them are that they have a high melting point. Clearly, if we're looking at many different applications like bakery or margarines or something, then we need solid fat. So we need a fat with a high melting point. They're very stable, so high oxidative stability. So well, if they're very good if we want to cook or to fry with them. They can have good melting characteristics. So they can melt nicely in the mouth, give you the nice texture you want, the nice mouth feel when you come to eat a product. They can provide other functional properties in different systems, so they can break down. We can get a nice structure which flows, moves around in the way we want, and of course, they're cheap. We're taking quite cheap liquid oils. We're performing a process which is cheap to perform, and so yes, so the cost is very low compared to, or possibly compared to, other alternatives. So this is why partially hydrogenated fats have been used over time, and why there is trans fats in the diet. Of course, what we want to do today is to look at the alternatives, to look at different types of fat which could be used. So here we can see what different kind of fats a manufacturer can think about that can be used to replace partially hydrogenated fats. So I think the obvious choice, if we're looking for fats which are solid at room temperature, and give us the stability and the functionality we need, is tropical oils. So tropical oils can provide these saturated fats, and we can think in terms of two types perhaps of saturated fats. So ones with chain length around 16 or 18. So here we're thinking of things such as palm, shea, or cocoa butter even. Even though that's perhaps a bit more expensive, a lot more expensive. These have a good all-round application, so they can be used in many different products. But perhaps when we're coming to look at them in a solid product, they're polymorphic. They can have different crystal forms, and so we need to control to make sure we get the right crystal form that gives us the properties we want in a finished product. I mean, an obvious example is perhaps chocolate. If we heat it, then we can get chocolate bloom, when it goes all grey on the surface. And of course, we can also start to play with the fats. We can blend them, we can fractionate them to give to give us products with specific melting ranges for specific applications. Then the other alternative are the shorter chain, so fats with a chain length around 12, and here we can think of things like coconut or palm kernel. These tend to give us systems that are hard, fast melting, and usually don't need tempering. Yes, so there can be benefits from either kind of fat. Now, of course, there can be some in some countries that there is a desire not to use tropical oils. We see concern about the environmental impact in countries like Malaysia or Indonesia. And so we can look at temperate oils instead. Now, the issue with temperate oils is the colder the region where you grow your oil, generally, the more liquid it is. So we can think of things such as sunflower and canola oils, and these, of course, are very liquid. Can give us issues if we want to make anything solid with them. But we could start to think about using pioleic blends, and these are blends which are more stable, long lasting, more stable to oxidation, for example. And so these can be very good for applications such as frying. Now, that it is possible perhaps to create harder fats from temperate oils, and there is a lot of research that is undertaken in this area, looking at high stearic sunflower oil, for example. But also that there's always the risk when we're developing new crops that the yield isn't very good. So it needs to work for the farmer to produce enough oil so that the farmer can make money and want to plant the crop as well as delivering what we need. So that the new uptake of new crops can be relatively slow, and they can be relatively expensive in the first few years. I know that what we can do, of course, is rather than just use the pure crops, we could look at ways in which we can modify them, but modify them in a way that we're not creating partially hydrogenated fats or any other product which could be deleterious to health. So one idea that we can look at is the interesterification of fats. And we can do this either using a chemical process, or we use a chemical catalyst, we heat it up with a chemical catalyst, or if we want to be more natural, we can use enzymatic processes. And yeah, there might be slight differences between them, but the principle's the same. What we're going to do is to take the fatty acids off the fats, throw them in the air, bring them back together, and then we'll end up with a system which is more randomized. So we'll end up with a more homogeneous fat. So perhaps if we just have a smaller amount of the saturated fat, we're able to deliver something which is functional and gives us the solids that we want. And so an interesterified fat is more likely to have the small beta prime crystals that we want, and then it's more likely to be malleable, functional, give us the plasticity we want in many applications. Another option that we can think of with liquid oils is to fully hydrogenate them. Now, we've seen in the past, partial hydrogenation was a technique that was well used, but this delivers trans fat, and clearly we must avoid that. But if we complete the hydrogenation, we go to full hydrogenation, then we can get completely saturated fats. And so this can be a good option to deliver hard trans fats from temperate oils, and they are palm oil or tropical oil free, so that could be good for some consumers. But they are hydrogenated. So even though we're not making not making the partially hydrogenated fat that we don't want, the consumer may see the hydrogenation on the label, and the consumer may not like that. So these products may not be very popular. So in Europe, for example, it's very rare to see fully hydrogenated fats, whereas in North America, these are more popular. And then we can look at some ways that are coming up in the future. Just like to give you an inkling of that. So if we move away from plants for our oils, then there's quite a lot of research going on in the world looking at making oils and fats by fermentation. And so there are different academic groups in different countries looking at different bugs and how they can use these bugs to grow different or to produce different oils and fats. And at the moment, I think they're available on a relatively small scale, but I would anticipate that, within the next, or certainly within the next decade or probably less, fermented fats with specific functionalities will be available. Maybe the costs will be low. It needs to be seen. We can also see that there's companies reacting air with electricity, and then you react the carbon dioxide, you stick the molecules together and you can make fats that way. I mean, this is a more perhaps a more risky kind of long-term process, but it is possible to make fats just from the air, and there are research teams looking at that. Whether it will ever be commercial is another question. Clearly, you'll need a lot of electric to get it to work, but it could happen. And then, of course, we can look at other sources, and in particular, I think insects are one source that could be of great interest in the future. Insects are already being exploited for fats and proteins for animal feed, and so there's probably just a short distance from animal feed to human food. Whether people want to eat them or not, of course, that's another interesting question, but certainly technically it's very close and can be done. And often there are differences, of course, depending on the different species, the different type of insect. But the black soldier fly larvae is being produced on quite a large scale in the Netherlands at the moment, and these give you high lauric fats, so similar to sort of coconut oil or palm kernel oil. So those are things that can be used and could work very well in different applications. And now, so that's an overview of perhaps where we can source different fats from and the possibilities. And now I'd like to come and to look at different potential applications, different ways in which we use fats, and how we can replace the trans fats we use in different applications. So what we want to do is to think about the functionality, the behavior that we need for a fat in a specific application. So we'll look at a few today. Clearly we can't look at every food, but hopefully these are some of the more useful ones, the more common ways of preparing foods. So I hope it covers the range of foods that you're interested in. So perhaps we can start with frying. So frying's clearly a technique where we're looking to cook, and in particular to dry our food as quickly and as efficiently as possible. So high temperatures are needed because we want to dry we want to dry the food, we want to drive the water out of the food. So yes, the food's got to be above 100 degrees C. Traditionally, animal fats were used in lots of cultures and in lots of applications, but there are restrictions now for health reasons and also for lifestyle choice, and because that they can be quite expensive and not so available. So we can look at the So that's why, I mean, trans fats were important. I mean, saturated fats, that they could be replaced by saturated fats. Clearly, these are stable and will work at high temperatures, but they're not necessarily. When we cook food, when we fry food, we do absorb a lot of the fat into the food. And as we saw from the previous speaker, saturated fats are not necessarily desirable for health reasons. So we want other sources of vegetable oils. And if we look at other sources, that then the next obvious thing is the monounsaturated fats. If we look at the stability of saturated, monounsaturated, and polyunsaturated fats, so then we're thinking of this kind of cheaper sunflower oils, for example, then the stability varies, by a factor of 100 to 10 to 1. So monounsaturated fats can provide us with a fat system that is appropriately stable and isn't perhaps and has better health perception than the saturated fats. And therefore, oils that are rich in monounsaturates, even if they have some saturates with them, are popular choices. So we can think of, if we look at tropical oils, we can think of palm olein. So yeah, we've fractionated the palm, and this is the liquid fraction. We can also think of high monounsaturated versions of different temperate oils. So we can think of canola or rape, cottonseed, soy, or sunflower, or other oils. But what we don't want is oils with high amounts of polyunsaturates, because they'll tend to break down perhaps quite quickly, and we'll end up with a lot of kind of dirt, if you like, a lot of mess in the frying process. So when we're thinking about frying, what do we need? Well, a good frying oil, we need it to be thermally stable. Yes, so it's not going to oxidize. We don't want it to break down. So we want it to last for at least a good lifetime. So yeah, we don't need to keep churning and changing our oil. We've got to think of the sensory products of the fried product. And we want a good, safe application. So we don't want, lots of spattering, lots of oil spraying all over the place when we're frying, because that's not safe for the operators. So how we can do this? Well, we could look at, we want to avoid too much of polyunsaturated oils in the system. We want to use high oleic oils, high amounts of monounsaturated oils. And so, yeah, we get the blends that containing the oils we just discussed, palm olein, canola, soy, sunflower. And we can look at, blending of these. Next, we can think about, I'd like to think about bakery. So, what does a baker need when they're coming to do their baking? Well, if you think about it, what's important is the sort of deformation and flow of a fat. So it needs to perform in a specific way. If you talk to a baker, that they will take a fat, that they'll rub it between their fingers, and they'll say, no, this fat's no good, or this one's good, and it's hard to measure why. But clearly, it's the way in which a fat deforms and flows that is going to be very important for them. And so, yeah, a baker will assess this by touch and feel. So we need different fats or textured fats, shortenings or margarines for different applications, because we'll need a slightly different functionality and a slightly different melting point. So, yeah, we'll need one we're able to work with and one that's able to behave in the right way during the actual baking. So if we think about something like a croissant here, then or a puff pastry, then we'll have layers of dough, and we'll have layers. We want layers of fat in between the dough, so that when we come to bake it, it's going to blow up like a balloon, and we'll have lots of layers, or separate, and we'll get this nice airy kind of texture that we want. So in order to do that, we need to have a system where the fat's going to deform in the same way as the dough, so that we get this nice layered system and we don't get any breaks in the layers. And so this is going to be very important. So we need the right fat. So different shortenings margarines are available for the applications, and these have the right melting point and deformability. So instead of using trans fats, we can formulate systems using a range of different fats based upon fully hydrogenated oils, based upon high oleic oils with small amounts of saturates, or based upon something like palm oil or other tropical oils. So it's the functionality that drives the choice of the oil that we need. And here we can just see a simple thing to show why we need solid fat. Here was just some work we did looking at bread, and clearly we want to get a nice rise in our bread, and so without any fat, it was quite relatively low. If we just use liquid oil, we put some liquid oil in the bread, we got a better rise. But if we started to increase the amount of solid fat in the system, then we got a much better rise, so a much nicer, lighter loaf that we wanted. So you can see, it is important. We can't just take away a partially hydrogenated fat and just replace it with or remove it, or just replace it with an oil. We do need some kind of solid in there to give us the performance that we want. So I suggested that there are these different shortenings or margarines that are available on the market. I'll come back to discuss them a little bit at the end of my talk. The important thing is to have the right plasticity to see what the functionality is from the system we're already using, and then to match that to the product performance, so that we can choose the right blend for the right application. Then we can look at confectionery, and I think we saw previously that a lot of confectionery does contain trans fats. I mean, what's important here, of course, is the melt in the mouth behavior and the texture. So if we want a chocolate or a chocolate type system, then it needs to melt fast in the mouth to give us the kind of cooling effect that we want. There are a lot of chocolate type systems, for example, on biscuits or other cakes and other things. If we have a chocolate biscuit, often these aren't real chocolate, but they contain cocoa butter substitutes, and typically these have contained a large amount of partially hydrogenated lauric fat, and this gives the functionality that's needed. Blends are available based upon unhydrogenated coconut and palm kernel lauric fats. But there is perhaps still some difference in functionality, although the manufacturers are working to improve that. Cocoa butter equivalents and cocoa butter alternatives based upon palm oil and shea, other systems may be available, but they may be a bit more expensive, and you may need to temper. So you may need to think about how you do this. It may need some development to get the right fat for your application. We can look about margarines and spreads, also dressings. So here we need a sufficient amount of saturated fat to give us the structure, as well as oil for the flow, because we just don't want a hard system. Therefore, different blends can be developed. We want a flat solid fat curve. We want the solids to be the same over the kind of use and melting temperature or mouth temperatures. We don't necessarily want them to deform quickly. We want them to be stable. So we need to find good hard stocks. So yeah, it's common to use esterified fats together with hard stocks. So something like a palm stearin, so a fractionated palm using the hard parts can give us the sort of hard crystals that we need in order to create a good margarine. Then I think, when we think about it, I think another thing to think about, we can choose the right oil, we can decide what oil we want, we can choose the right blend for our specific application, but we need to think about our processing. So we need to process correctly to give us the right, if we're making a solid system, to give us the right crystals, to give us the right performance. And so, yes, so we can crystallize, if we're taking a margarine, or for example, we can crystallize it in the apparatus, but it's still going to, it's not finished then. It's still quite soft, and it's still going to crystallize over the next few days. So and then we could perhaps, if we're not careful, we could lose the kind of texture that we've created at the end of our process. So we need to be aware of things like that as we create our products. So we want to things like process hard to create lots of small nuclei, lots of small crystals, so they don't grow too big. And we want to control the temperature to prevent polymorphic transformations. And we need to do this even after we've finished processing. So we don't want to leave our material in a hot warehouse for several days, because perhaps polymorphic changes and we'll end up with a sandy type product. So we should be aware of that. We should remember that. So the optimal shortening again will depend on the application and what the consumer wants. Now there is a lot of research on different alternatives to fats, different ways to structure. These are more or less successful. I don't think there's so much in the market. I mean, the oleo gels have been an area where there's been a great deal of academic research, but I don't feel that there's been so much application in the market. And here you're using things like waxes instead of saturated fats to structure. But a lot of the work is done on systems that perhaps there's not so much of it around in the world, or it's difficult to source in a food grade way. So I think, sticking with the fat based systems is likely to be more interesting and more useful. So just like to end by giving a few practical steps. So I can just say that the different oil manufacturers have products that don't contain trans fats, and they can come from different sources. Now, I'd just like to give some examples of Cargill products to show you the different sources that are possible. So in North America, for example, there are 3 different ranges. So we have Regal. This is based on fully hydrogenated soybean. We have Palm Agility based on palm, and we have Clear Valley High Oleic. These are based on high oleic canola oils with some hard stocks added. So you can see, depending upon the fat you want to use, the price you want to pay, and what your consumer wants to eat, then there can be a different choice, and there are these different possibilities and different opportunities. So I'd just like to conclude by saying, there are, by using saturated and high monounsaturated oils, there are good possibilities to replace trans fats. Optimized processing, we need to think about it to ensure we have optimized processing, can deliver the high quality products that behave at least as well as hydrogenated. And we can think about other structuring agents and other possibilities. But as a food scientist, our work needs to follow the nutritional data. So I'd like to thank you all for your attention, and hand over to the next speaker. Hand back to Sandra.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Paul. You've given us a lot to think about this morning. You shared with us that the reason really why manufacturers tend to go towards the trans fats is because they are more cost effective and stable. and they tend to do what we want the end product to do. You know, it has a good melting characteristics, etc. But you mentioned the alternatives and the applications, how we can apply them. Thank you for underscoring that tropical oils, such as coconut oil, we're in a tropical country, is a very good alternative. And for giving us some practical steps as to how we can move forward. I just wanted to remind some persons who may have joined us in this webinar a little bit later, that there is a manual as well that has been shared with us this morning from one of our presenters, Mr. Julien LaFleur from the International Food and Beverage Alliance, and I'll be reposting it in the chat for persons. But thank you so much, Paul, for giving us such a thorough presentation. Before we go on to our next presenter, it's my pleasure to just say welcome to Ms. Oriane Henry, the new Director of Commerce at the Ministry of Industry, Investments and Commerce. Thank you so much as well, some of our other partners from the NCRA, from Scientific Research Council. We see that this is a significant cross-cutting topic for those of us, not just who are manufacturers in the food industry, but also across all the affiliated organizations. And thank you so much for being with us this morning. We will be making the presentations available to you. If you have registered, we have your information. And I just want to encourage everyone that we will have a significant Q&A at the end of all the presentations. So please post your questions in the chat. We will make sure to take note of them and respond to you accordingly. So our next presenter is Mr. Rick Della Porta. He has been the Senior Principal Scientist, Fats and Oils Technical SME at PepsiCo, Frito-Lay, North America R&D Analytical Labs in Texas. And he's been doing this since 1984 to present. He has a Master's of Science in Organic Analytical Electrochemistry from the University of Texas and a Bachelor of Science in Environmental Toxicology from the University of New England in Maine. Mr. Della Porta started as a scientist on the Fats and Oils raw material team, where he learned the basics of oil analysis and processing. He then moved to Analytical Service team and expanded his learning with a focus on resolving oil quality aspects in his company's various oil snack business. During his career, his focus has been on analytical method development in the analysis of lipids and their oxidative reactivity to industry processes and the correlation of oil properties to shelf life performance. I'm so happy that Rick is with us because he's going to be giving us a practical example of how a company has taken the information we've gotten from the scientists straight through to changing and having an end product that is in compliance with what is being recommended by WHO. And over the past 12 years, Mr. Della Porta has been the global SME resource for oil-related issues and opportunities through the PepsiCo organization. It's our pleasure to welcome you, Richard, and I'd like to hand over to you to take us through this process.
Thank you, Sandra. Thank you, everyone, for inviting me. Especially enjoyed the opening remarks by Minister Tufton. I want to thank both Julien, Professor Samuels, and Paul for setting me up so well with all of the great background information. So to proceed, this has been an ongoing journey for PepsiCo globally. I'm going to be very brief in the first couple of points here. What a trans fatty acid is, we've heard quite a bit. The methods themselves, you're well established with doing, but really the bulk of my information will be revolving around the effort it took to make our consumers happy with the new products that we had to provide for them to remove trans fat. So just quickly, what is a trans fatty acid? Basically, it's a long-chain carboxylic acid. Unlike the cis version, which is bent, trans are very linear, very similar to saturated fats, and as we've heard, have much more detrimental effect on the body than saturated fats do. So it was really important that we address this in our industry. So we've heard they're found naturally in ruminant dairy fats. These are the conjugated linoleic acids that actually have some health benefit versus the non-conjugated, the trans fats. They are mostly formed during partial hydrogenation. We've eliminated that step for the most part, but there's a trace amount that are formed during the deodorization process of oils. And in order to make an oil friable and usable, it has to go through a full process for refining, bleach, and deodorization. Otherwise, it will not act properly in your fryers or in any other food application. And of course, the most common trans fatty acid is the trans 18-1, the oleic acid, which is the cohort to oleic acid, which is the best monounsaturated fatty acid for the diet. So as Paul explained quite well, there are a lot of reasons why partially hydrogenated oils gain popularity. There was this detrimental aspect of saturated fat that hit us back in the 80s. And so we had to shift to stable oils, and partial hydrogenation did that. It gave us shelf life stability. It gave you texturability. It was pretty neutral in taste, so you weren't overwhelming your material. It had a great base quality. It was actually cheaper, and it allowed us to create from a very wide range of oil feedstocks, different types of partially hydrogenated oils that had different functions. And originally, it was perceived as healthier alternative to saturated fats. Nobody really looked at trans. So then we had to. When we started looking at trans, both the AOAC and the AOCS came up with really nice, straightforward methods. The AOAC specifies for food products, but you can also apply that to the AOCS method. The use of an internal standard allows you to quantify the total amount of trans as well as the total amount of fat in a food material. And we've been doing this extensively for the past 20 years. In our history, when we develop a product, there are the primary considerations. First and foremost, is it going to have the right flavor? Don't forget, most of what we're dealing with in our industry is going to be fried. Does it have the stability for shelf life? This is a product that's going to sit in a bag, on a shelf, in a store, or in your home for periods of time, which could be up to 6 months. Unlike restaurants and other industries where the shelf life is basically minutes or days, we have to worry about keeping it stable to our consumer. Cost and availability, we've heard about. This is a primary consideration. Cost for the raw material and cost to the consumer in the end. And overall, the consumer has to accept this new product, and they have to enjoy it, appreciate it, and we have to spend a lot of effort in that direction. So how we replace it depends, as Paul said, on the functionality. Whether it's a cooking fat that transfers heat, creates some flavor, texture. Is it a texturizing fat that gives you the structure you need, the mouthfeel, the lubrication? Or is it something that's going over the top to hold flavor, like slurry oils or sprays where we put seasoning on top? These are all critical aspects in the functionality and play a role in selecting the oils. So historically, we've heard that we needed to make hydrogenated oils out of a lot of different oils. As early as 1991, Pepsi, Frito-Lay North America in particular, became very concerned about the amount of trans fat in the diet, and we were starting to look at alternatives. It actually accelerated much later in that decade to where we started really looking at differences because we saw the writing on the wall. We are very consumer conscious. We're also very subjective to non-government organizations picking on our products because they are not necessities, they are luxuries. So everything we could do to create a positive image, we were doing, and we undertook a challenge to eliminate partially hydrogenated oils from 90% of our core brands. And by 2003, we had done it. We replaced mostly with corn oil and middle-aged sons. And we did this 3 years ahead of the requirement for labeling. But this was a major effort. The FDA actually decided in 2015 that PHOs were no longer GRAS. And by 2018, they had to be removed from the food stream. We announced in 2003 we were done. We included the trans fat line in advance of the requirement, so people could see that our products were in spec for the trans limit of less than 0.5 gram per serving. And then by 2018, we have completely removed all partially hydrogenated oils from all of our product formulations globally. We are a very active member of IFBA. We had committed not to exceed the 2 grams of trans fat per 100 grams of oil in any of our products globally by the end of this year. And we've succeeded. Getting into the challenges we saw, the range of products, and this is not everything, but the majority, range from simple frying of tortilla chips to coated cheese puffs to multi-grain products, cookies, crackers, the dips. And we are also part of Quaker. Quaker is actually part of PepsiCo North America Foods. So we had to deal with the cereals, the granola bars, and of course, seasonings. And each one of these took a particular effort because they have specific consumers that appreciate these products. Tortilla chips was probably our biggest challenge. We have multiple types of tortilla chips. We have plain salted, we have nacho cheese Doritos, we have specialty chips that are rolled up or folded, and everyone has a consumer separate. So when we undertook to remove the partially hydrogenated soy oil from that, the first challenge was getting a flavor profile that matched. And this took time because we had to adjust frying conditions to optimize the oil quality. And that's a big player when you're talking about removing stable oil functions in North America. We don't have the luxury of going to the palms in the US. We also, as part of the PepsiCo Positive, as Julien alluded to, we're also focused on reducing sodium, sugars, total saturates, and reducing total fat if possible in our products. So it's all part of the PepsiCo Positive initiative to make our consumers feel good about eating this product. So how did we do it? Well, product quality is the big concern. For us, it's the key part of what makes our consumer buy our products. Would they accept any less quality? Never. In fact, they are more discriminating than people realize. Will they pay more? Not if they don't have to. So our first goal was to make cost equivalence as well as an invisible change to the product. So healthier, that's the key. Stable, that's actually a workabout we can do. Our systems are designed for long shelf lives. So we did have to improve not just on the frying side, but on the packaging and storage side. We had to have the functionality. So for cookies in particular, making a filling in a cookie, we had to incorporate some saturated fat. And we did this by blending with palm and palm fractions and healthier oils to create the functionality that would maintain structure and flavor throughout the shelf life. Of course, we couldn't compromise any of our sensory, and availability was not a problem for most of the liquid oils up until, well, last year. We've all seen the challenge now in the global oil market that has occurred because of the conflict that's occurring in Ukraine. And of course, reasonable cost. Everything has to be cost effective. You have to be able to make money and have the consumer appreciate what they're getting for the value. So what did we do? We started looking at more stable versions of soy and canola. In addition to the corn and the middle-aged sun, high-oleic canola became the next primary oil we could use for frying, coating, mixing it with a little palm, gave us the stability we needed for fillings. Ideally, high-oleic soy for us, and again, for frying purposes, this is the most stable oil next to a palm or a coconut when it comes to frying. It's highly monounsaturated. It's got a great base of tocopherol, the natural antioxidant that protects your product post-fry. This problem was there was a lot of debate over what's the best profile for this high oleic soy. We also have the high stearic soy that's coming up slowly into the market to replace the need for doing interesterification and the full hydrogenation blends. We like palm. I have no real issues with palm in our system. Outside the US, a lot of the countries are still using palm fractions, mainly for the stability aspect and the cost. but they do contain that high saturation, and Pepsi as an organization is committed to removing that saturation down to the least possible level that's available for an oil commonly. Our concern was, how fast can we, or do we, respond to public health concerns? Well, in our business, we had to do it right away. As soon as it becomes evident to the consumer that they're going to read the label, they're going to look for these negatives that they're being told are unhealthy, they need to see the change. And actually, that is the biggest challenge, how fast to get it to market. Media play is very high on these things. They want to adapt the consumer to looking at labels, to looking at what they're eating. We can't make them eat less, but we can make them eat healthier. And we did. We knew that the heart health was the key driver. Coronary heart disease is a major player in the world. We know this as a fact. We don't want our products to be a contributor. So we made the move. We had to do several things. We had the ability, and this is a key aspect, to leverage purchasing power as a large company and get our suppliers, Cargill's, the oil suppliers of the world, to get involved with reducing the trans in their systems. So we did. We leveraged purchasing power, suppliers, and we were able to convert our products down to the zero trans label claims in North America and Canada. Canada's rules are even stricter than North America for claiming zero trans. You have to have a product team that goes into a hyper mode, we called it. High speed testing, get products on the bench, get products from the bench to a test plant, get them in the consumer's hands, get feedback, change the labeling, let them read the labels, see what they like, what they don't like. We got to get purchasing involved to get the oils from different sources at cost. And of course, we kept pushing on the suppliers, because until pH was banned, there was still that aspect of, well, we can hydrogenate specially, lower the trans, but it still wasn't going to be enough in the long run. Food safety nutrition teams have to be in the system from the go. They need to review, they need to be able to revamp the nutrition panels, check on what regulations are required. Packaging, it takes time. You don't just make a new package. You have to go through a series of steps to get the graphics built, then go to a printer, then print it, and produce enough film to cover your entire market. And in a business model that Pepsi has in the foods, we have hundreds of products. Even if they're all, say, potato chips, there may be 12 different types, and every one of them has to have graphics done for them. And this can take time, 6 months to a year, depending on how many different film packaging changes have to be made. Lots of times you can do stickers, and we've done that too, where we've just gone and made a new sticker and stuck it on the bag just to get it out in test market so people can see the difference. But advertising to your consumer that you're making these changes keeps them conscious of the fact that you're working for them. So as a result, we had success. We delivered lots of new products, new formulations of oil, and our consumers accepted it. There were a few complaints. There are consumers who are experts in a particular product. I have a dear friend in the USDA who is a puffed Cheeto expert. And he knew as soon as we took the hydrogenated oil off the product, and complained to me personally every time he saw me for a year. Eventually, he got used to the new flavor profile, and on we went. You can teach the consumer that something is better for them, provided you cover their bases on flavor, stability, and cost. And now, the job's not over, right? We have to stay diligent. As Paul said in his, hydrogenation itself is a key word to the consumers who are paying attention. And putting it on a package can force questions that you don't really, your answer is no, there's no trans, but it says hydrogenation. So we look for alternatives. High oleic oils are the biggest option. The high oleic soy, right now it's mostly a GM product, but there are versions that are coming on board that are non-GM that'll be available globally. It's going to take time. Commercialization, as Paul will tell you, takes 5 to 10 years to get a new oil into the market. He talked about the cost to the farmer. You want a farmer to grow something that's not going to produce as much, you pay them a premium. That premium translates out to the consumer eventually. So we keep pushing the development of these oils to get them into the market as commodity. So in conclusion, obviously the process takes a long time. It's an impressive process that you have to go through. You have to be coordinated. You have to have the support of all layers of the business. And then you need to continue the work to find replacements over time. And the consumer needs to be in the loop. They need to know you're doing it for them. You need to tell them that you've done it for them. You need to show them that you've done it for them and prove to them this product is as good as it was with hydro oils. So with that, I'm going to thank my PepsiCo sponsors, Lori Kelly, who's our head of nutrition, André Burns from communications, Carolyn Kelly, who's now retired, who was a big part of our joint effort to join IFBA, Oliver Herbert from our European group, who's part of that team now, and Nina Shah, who's my product compatriot when it comes to reformulating and testing and doing all of the work necessary to provide our consumers and our global partners with high quality, healthy alternatives for snacking. So thank you for your consideration. Allow me to do my presentation. I'll turn it back over to Sandra.
Excellent. Wow, Rick, you've given us so much to think about. I love even the name of your presentation, Hey Trans, Get Out of My Product. And you certainly showed us the journey that PepsiCo took from as early as 1991. This is impressive, and it underscores as you went into the variety of products that's offered by your company, and the different areas and supportive industries, such as marketing, that is critical to the manufacturers and exporters as we move forward. And I want to take this quote with me. Advertising to consumers, keeping their consciousness that we are working for them. Thank you for that. And I underscore that. That is definitely something that the JMEA has taken very seriously, not just looking at our manufacturers and exporters, but also those who are consuming the products that are manufactured by our partners and our members. Thank you so much for that. And thank you for everyone who made the presentation this morning. We're going to be immediately moving on to our Q&A part of our webinar this morning. And we have our first question. What is a typical time taken to reformulate, test, and launch each non-IP TFA product? And I'd like to direct that question over to Rick. And of course, our other presenters afterwards can also weigh in. Over to you, Rick. What is the typical time taken to formulate, test, and launch each product?
Formulation time can take 2 to 3 months, depending on what changes have to be made. To get it up through test market can take up to 6 months, depending on shelf life considerations. US shelf lives are much shorter, so we were able to turn things around. I think we're working at about a 3-month shelf life. And then to go to full production and get it out there in the market can take another 3 to 6 months. So we're looking at anywhere from 12 to 18 months for a consumer goods product that's going to have to stay on the shelf.
12 to 18 months for each.
Yes.
And then you're also looking at the subsequent label changes and packaging changes and the marketing that goes into it. Because as you mentioned, one product can have 12 varieties or more. Thank you so much.
A lot of that goes on sequentially, though. Once you have established the first 2 or 3 months, then everybody gets into the act to get the product prepared for marketing.
Thank you. Thank you for that and for underscoring. The minister mentioned earlier that a number of our trade partners have already taken on this zero trans fat in the foods that are being brought into the country. So that's an excellent catalyst for us as manufacturers and exporters to ensure that we are in compliance, not just for those products that we're exporting, but also for the local market. And I just want to remind persons of that December 2025 deadline. You know, we have agreed as a country and as a region to how we're going to move forward with the elimination of trans fats from the highest level, the gatekeepers, but practically on the ground, Rick. What I hear you saying is that that is a decision that's taken by each company and then all the other arms of the company, from the board, the board level down to practical application, can take almost 2 years.
Usually it comes from above, right? We get our directive to do this from the top. So once they commit our R&D facility to do this, yeah, it could take 2 years on the long end, but as quick as 12 months, depending on the degree of change that occurs in the consumer's acceptance, right? If we get high acceptance early on in testing, we can move much faster. But if we start finding that there are particular segments that don't like something out of the product, flavor, texture, then we have to go back to the table and readdress that.
Thank you. I have another question for you. What was the typical cost to get each of these done?
The cost is usually inherent in our R&D facility. It doesn't cost us extra, except for when we go to do the studies. If we go to consumer panel, every consumer panel costs us $20,000 on average.
Wow.
Because we go out to a third party. You use a third party, so you're not like guiding the consumer to like your product. The cost for changing packaging, that's a big cost. So that's part of it. And it varies depending on the packaging, the labeling, the amount of film you're making. A lot of it can be done up front for very low cost. The suppliers are very willing to give you small amounts of material to work with because they're pushing their products on you. And you can test on the bench for very low cost. It's only when you start to go out to the consumer side that it starts costing money.
I see. And what are the type of technical skills and knowledge that is required in the companies?
We cover everything. We have, food scientists. We have process engineers, chemical engineers, mechanical engineers. We have digital guys who do this coding for our systems. Analytical skills. I mean, my background is not food. I'm electroorganic analytical chemist by training, and I've learned to analyze food. And when I first took this job back in the 80s, I interviewed at a lot of different companies, and Pepsi has always had the lead in technology for analyzing food. I used to laugh. I say, we don't make potato chips the old-fashioned way. We use science. And even though it's a potato sliced, fried, and salted, you're not going to find a more technically developed product in the way we analyze and control. And that's the big secret, is making sure your control starts at the front. But it takes all types of skills. The marketing teams, the sales teams, they're all involved to get this product into the market.
So each of your products are made by science. Thank you for underscoring that. And I mean, PepsiCo has resources that can allow your in-house scientific team to move this along. For those of us who are small or micro or medium enterprises, such as in Jamaica, the good thing is that even if we don't have that kind of expertise in-house, we do have the opportunity to secure it in country. We have the standard keepers, as well as scientists and other organizations that we can outsource some of that work to. So, but thank you for giving us an idea of what is required as we move forward. I'd like to now direct a question to Professor Samuels. How long would it take a firm that does not have the same kind of coordinated team and research and technical centers, such as what Pepsi has shared with us? How long would it take them to move from where their product is now with trans fat, possibly in our local context and in a resource constrained setting as we are in, to actually get this done? You've heard the comparison. Rick said 2 years approximately for him. What are your thoughts regarding our local context?
So, of course, I'm an academic. I'm not a manufacturer, so I don't know. But what I can say is that, as we know, North America and Canada are our largest trading partner, and they have required that trans fat be removed from their products.
Right.
And as Minister Tufton said this morning, this is an opportunity for people who want to export. And in fact, there are several countries in Jamaica and in the Caribbean who have been through this process because they are exporting to the United States. So we have knowledge in Jamaica and in the region as to how this process can happen and has happened in the local context. So I was thinking that maybe what we can do is that we could have another webinar and we could invite those companies, those local companies who have already removed trans fat to come and talk to their local counterparts and explain within the local context how they did it and the timeline and all that. So that's what I would suggest.
I agree with you. I'm happy to say that there is a technical working group that has been formed with JMEA and the Ministry of Health and others that have started this discussion. And this webinar today is an important next step. But I agree with you. We have the technical input, we have the evidence. What we need to do now is hear from some of our local examples as to how they've already been able to do this and achieve the timeline even before the deadline. So thank you for that. I have another question for you, Professor. You mentioned earlier the study that was done last year that was shared also at a workshop.
Yes.
And some alarming numbers. 96% of some of the products that claim to have zero trans fat were actually incorrectly labeled. Could you unpack some more of that data if you have it at your fingertips?
Right. So, you know, the labels on a product are put there by the manufacturer, and the manufacturer depends on either what the source of the product tells them or whether they can do their own testing. Or I think sometimes they are like norms that are sort of international norms. So you would, you know, if you're making corned beef, for example, you would kind of go to this international place, I don't know, and they would give you a sort of breakdown of what they think is in the product, and you may put that on your label. But however the label gets onto the product, the fact is that because in Jamaica, we did not have the capacity to validate. We did not know before this that a lot of the labels were incorrect. And so the Ministry of Health has actually gotten all the results that our project did with Professor Henry, and they are in process now of getting in touch with the manufacturers to check to see, one, do they know that their product has in trans fat? And then where are they, what is the source of the ingredients that they are using? Because as I mentioned before, we don't hydrogenate oil in the Caribbean. So it is imported. And the key thing is for us to identify those importers who are importing partially hydrogenated oil and to sort of stop it at the coastline, you know, because if it doesn't get in, then you don't have it. But as the previous speaker said, not having it means that the manufacturers will have to do some reformulation and so on and so forth. The good thing is that so many companies have already done this. So the timeline, for example, that PepsiCo gave to us could probably be shortened because we are learning from Pepsi. They have done it, they have been through the process, they, you know, so I think it's important for us to continue the partnerships, both with our international and local manufacturers, and that they can guide the smaller manufacturers who are now coming into the fold, because a lot of the big ones have done it already.
Thank you so much. And one of the things that Rick mentioned in his presentation is because of the size of PepsiCo, they can leverage, and the influence that they have on their suppliers is significant. For some of us who are small and micro and medium enterprises, it means we may have to come together to have that kind of a voice. And of course, that's one of the big opportunities for JMEA to continue to do that lobbying and represent our members. So thank you for that. I agree with you that I think it may be a combination of persons being unaware of really the source of the oil and assuming a lot. You ask a question, you get a yes, you don't have a way to verify it.
Right.
So thank you for that. I'd like to now direct a question to Paul. Dr. Smith, how do the changes typically affect shelf life of the products?
Well, that depends on what the product is. So I think when we were, Rick was talking, mainly fried products, which are then stored. So we're looking at well, the overall shelf life, and then, I mean, as he was saying, it's possible to control things in order to still deliver the long shelf life that's needed. But again, we might be again thinking of foods that you don't want or shouldn't have such a long shelf life. So instead of thinking of, you know, fried potato chips, then we can think of, you know, fries where we're gonna cook them, buy them, and then consume them within a relatively short space of time. So I think here what we're looking at is how a different oil, you know, could affect the texture of the fry, and also how the just the flavor of the fry varies as we change an oil, and these things can be important. But the questions are very different than those that Rick suggested. But I think as I but then again, we can look at other foods as well. But generally, as I was suggesting, the more we move towards polyunsaturated oils, then the shorter the time, the lifetime is. So if we can retain using high oleic oils and or saturated oils, then we can still maintain good shelf lives generally.
And I understand you said it really depends on what the product is. And I'm not sure if this is a repeat question, but I'm still going to ask it. How quickly would you know if the shelf life is the one that you want? Do you have to literally just wait until it reaches there and test it? How quickly would that?
You can test it. That there might be ways that you can have. You can look at. There are analytical techniques you can have to see how oil will degrade in different foods, or perhaps there are accelerated testing, so that'll give you a way that you can see that something's breaking down. But at the end of the day, the way to do it is to look at the sensory behavior over the lifetime of the food, and see if it's still acceptable over the time that you want, because that will be the real test that you will have.
I see. Thank you so much for that. I appreciate it. I have a question that's directed at Professor Samuels. Dr. Samuels, Professor Samuels, can you indicate whether any other companies locally that had relabeled their products for exported actually had removed trans fats? Or is it that the product in the first place didn't have any, and they just made sure to do that as an extra marketing push? Can you speak to that?
Yes, I can speak about Bermuda's. You know, the originator, I don't know what his position still is now the chancellor of the university. And so we have, I have, ways to get information. And Bermuda's had trans fat, and they went through the process of removing trans fat from their products. I can say that for Bermuda's. I can't give you 100% on other companies because I don't have the input. I believe Lasco, but I don't want to speak out of turn, but I can speak for Bermuda's.
Thank you. And I just want to underscore that when you have the purchasing power, then you can significantly negotiate with your supply chain. It is when you're a smaller organization and you may not have that purchasing power that you need to be creative in order to still maintain the quality, the texture, the flavor, and the shelf life of the product that you want. But thank you for sharing that. And someone also mentioned that Bermuda's was also a very good example that we can look at. I have a question here for Julien. Julien, what has the experience been of other developing countries with the elimination of IPTFAs from their product? Can you share a little bit more, go a little deeper for us?
It's been a bit of a patchwork of some countries moving ahead with regulation, some stalling, and then some in the middle taking the initiative, much like what Jamaica is doing today. So it's been a bit of a patchwork, but the WHO has a list of priority countries, markets where there is both a high consumption of trans fats, either that or a high incidence of respiratory and cardiac diseases that we assume are linked to the consumption of trans fatty acids. So priority countries where both there's a high metric, a high volume of trans fat, as well as a need for support for the local manufacturers to get and the local players, including the public health community, to get together. So the WHO is keeping a list of about 10 countries that they're trying to support. They're otherwise also regularly updating a list of the progress of countries in adopting the package that they've designed, which comprises legislation. It also comprises another series of measures, awareness raising campaigns for consumers, etc. At the end of the day, they would probably agree that the bigger hurdle isn't so much legislation, although it is, and manufacturers, yes, they're slow, but they're still going to move at some point. The bigger hurdle in plenty of markets, especially developing economies, will be what we call out-of-home consumption, street food, and food that you just buy and consume outside of your home. These tend, if they're fried, these tend to be fried with low quality oils, and sometimes those are the ones with traces of trans fatty acids. So the bigger hurdle down the line will probably be all of this off-market, off-trade consumption of food that may include TFA. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for giving us that to think about. I appreciate how you framed it in terms of the legal and regulatory framework, maybe for the standard manufacturers, but those that, as you said, are not really off shelf, those who are really this is what we would call street food, which is what the working class tends to consume very quickly. It tends to be low cost and easy to do. So that means it's usually fried. Those are the ones that can sometimes still tip the balance in the wrong direction. I want to also give you an opportunity, Julien, to share a little bit more.
Can I just say one thing there, please?
Yes, Pro.
If we stop the import of partially hydrogenated oils, then the oils being used in street food will have less tendency to form trans fats. So
absolutely, absolutely. Again, it goes back to the policy and legislative framework within which we have to operate. That enabling environment that we need. Thank you so much for underscoring that. Julien, before I go to the next question, could you just spend a few seconds and unpack the manual? I've posted it in the chat a few times, but can you share with us? And also, can you mention, for the WHO, you mentioned there are about 10 countries. Do they have a timeline that we can follow to see how other countries are progressing? Or is it a literal, either you have or you haven't?
You'll see on the screen illustrations of the guide, and I'll take you through some of the features of the guide in just a second. But to answer your question, Sandra, the WHO keeps an updated list of progress for countries vis-a-vis a certain number of metrics. One of them is legislation, but that's not the only one. So as soon as a new piece of legislation on, for instance, labeling, or on banning the ingredient, or on moving the ingredient from an ingredient to a contaminant, which is also part of the legislative process. You have to, some countries just move those types of oils from one authorized list of ingredient to a contaminant, which means it becomes an issue of food safety and no longer of ingredients. Anyway, there's a number of metrics that the WHO has identified, and every time a country makes a progress towards that step, they move up on the ladder. So that's the progress for countries. The list of priority countries is a different one, and that's where they know that there needs to be some support, additional support, because of limited capacity for regulators to just get anything done. Some countries have many more crises to deal with and not necessarily the right capacity to set up the right framework and the right policy environment. I'll definitely dig this up and share this with Joy and with yourself, so that when we sum up this event and thank the participants and send them the recording, which I assume you might do, we can send them some information on what the WHO is doing in this space and how they're keeping track on progress for certain countries. But in the meantime, this is the guy that we developed about a year ago with the support of the AOCS, the American Organization of Oil Chemists Society, as well as with Cargill, who was one of the first, he was the first ingredients provider to take a step in eliminating trans fat. We're taking food manufacturers step by step between the key features of trans fat. Why were they important? Now, this is something we've discussed at length today. What are the features of PHO, partially hydrogenated oils, and why are they challenging to replace? We also identify a step-by-step guide of identifying the key functionalities that are critical to replace, doing different trials, testing, and then ultimately launching. And ultimately, this is a basic resource. It's by no means the entire encyclopedia that's necessary for an actual food scientist to help you, but it's the right tool for people like the ones attending this workshop today to begin the process of phasing out partially hydrogenated oils. So that's just giving you a quick illustration of a quick overview of our guide. It's available online. We've shared it a couple of times in the chat box, but also we'll share it in an email with the participants of today's workshop.
Yes, thank you so much for that. We really appreciate it. I'm not sure who this question is for, so anyone who feels so inclined, please open up your mic of our presenters. But a question has come in. Is there empirical evidence to show that the reduction of trans fat in the US and Canada has indeed resulted in a reduction in adverse health conditions? And if so, what is the level of decrease that we have seen?
Yes, thank you. I think I'll take that one. I actually posted the reference back in the chat. So New York City, as you know, many years before the more national ban in the United States, New York City under Mayor Michael Bloomberg, who is a public health champion, had banned the trans fats. And there's a paper here by Restrepo et al. And they indicate the study showed a 4.5 reduction in cardiovascular disease mortality rates and a saving of $3.9 million per 100,000 persons. So let's not forget the savings to the country that this is going to result in.
Definitely. Our Minister of Health, I know, would be fascinated by that. With some of the data that we've seen over the past decade in the increase in NCDs. And
the Minister of Finance also would be very interested. Yes.
And also, ultimately, the bottom line of the manufacturers, let's be frank. We want to know that there is a balance with us getting profits and also the health of the nation.
Right.
Thank you so much for sharing that data, Professor Samuels. A question also for you. Was Bermuda's using oils with trans fats in the first place? I think you said yes.
Yes.
And is this kind of information available to us for those who are interested and maybe doing similar kind of products, baked goods, etc.?
I mean, I don't know if Bermuda's has actually written up their experience, but I certainly suggest that the next webinar we bring them and others who have been through this process on, and then they can answer directly to the manufacturers here as to their local experience.
I agree. We really are looking forward to unpacking this definitely at a local level and seeing some of the champions, especially some of the questions that have come in terms of timeline.
Right.
You know, and we know that there are some supportive industries. We're looking at the marketing and the advertising and the packaging and what may need to change, and the questions on shelf life. That would be a very interesting next step. And that allows me to segue into some of our next steps that we have here at the JMEA. I just want to underscore that all the JMEA manufacturers of baked goods, cooking oils, confectionaries, condiments, snacks, desserts, spreads, fast food, breakfast cereal, and canned meats are being asked to review their raw material and identify those with trans fats or those partially hydrogenated oils. You know, a list of these raw material is really to be created. We're asking all the manufacturers here who come under that portfolio, who come under their products are one of those mentioned. Anybody who is using oils in any way, actually, look at what is actually being used in your raw material and create a list of everything that you have and share it with us at the JMEA so that we can work with you in partnership with some of the experts that are here, who are facilitators and presenters this morning, IFBA, PepsiCo, Cargill, etc., and how we can support reformulation where it is necessary. We're really encouraging our members to take this seriously. We have some deadlines that have been shared with us. We had 3 deadlines, one for 2023, one for 2024, but the one that I know most people may be thinking of is a 2025 deadline. But it takes a while to do this. We've heard this morning that even large companies that have significant resources, it can take them 16 to 18 months. So it means that we need to start from now. And I see Prof. Samuel nodding her head in agreement.
Yes.
Excellent. So some of our next steps. The mechanism to identify and engage with importers of the partially hydrogenated oils will be done with a view to establishing a timeline to halting some of the imports of those PHOs. The Ministry of Health and Wellness has formed a joint working team. We've spoken about this team with the JMEA in one of the members, the Ministry of Industry, Investment and Commerce, and the National Compliance and Regulatory Authority were also with us. Welcome, welcome. There's been a working group that has been formed to look at this. The first face-to-face meeting was actually just recently held in the month of March, and the information will be shared with our members of the JMEA. And manufacturers are to be engaged moving forward. And especially we're encouraging you to go directly, if needs be, to IFBA to receive and support advice on changes in manufacturing processes. And we've shared some resources. Our colleague here, Julien, has also shared a little bit more on some of the additional resources that are available. And we have examples of companies, both international and local, that have gone down this road. So you're not alone. And we want to identify other support areas. And that's one of the things that the JMEA has committed to doing. We will continue to identify other support organizations to support us in the elimination of IP, TFAs, and these partially hydrogenated oils from our Jamaican food supply. If there's any additional support that we can get from IFBA, Cargill, or PepsiCo, etc., we will definitely be tapping into that. And I want to say a very special thank you. Thank you to all our presenters this morning, and I'll go in order. I want to say a special thank you to our Minister Tufton, the Honourable Christopher Tufton, who has been a champion of a healthy lifestyle for years, and has been leading the rest of the Caribbean, not just the English-speaking Caribbean countries. And we want to say a special thank you for the Ministry of Health in their ongoing partnership with the JMEA. I want to say a special thank you to Mr. LaFleur, Deputy Secretary General of the IFBA, for being with us and for leveraging some of our speakers to be with us this morning. Thank you, Professor T. Alafia Samuels, for lending your expertise to us this morning, to Dr. Paul Smith, to Mr. Richard Rick Della Porta for being with us this morning. And a special thank you to our Vice President, André Gordon, Dr. Gordon. I anticipate you're going to have your hands full, especially for all our members who are going to be coming to you for support after this webinar this morning. And it would be remiss of me not to say a special thank you to the lady who is beside me, Joy. Joy, you have been a champion with the JMEA as it pertains to this particular topic of trans fat and elimination of trans fat in our foods. Thank you to the entire secretariat of the JMEA. And thank you to Kimisha Blake and of course, Joy. Alana, thank you for constantly supporting all of the social media that we've required and making sure that you keep us on track with what is required of us in terms of our advertising and marketing space. Thanks, everyone. Thank you for your time. Thank you, members and all our supporting Ministry of Industry and Commerce partners who came and joined us this morning. We are literally at the end of the hour of the 2.5-hour session. We're at the bottom of the hour. I encourage us as we move now towards having our lunch or dinner, in the case of Paul, that we choose well, given the learning that we've had today. Thank you again, everyone, for being here. Thank you, Joy, and have a fantastic rest of the afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you.